Recording. Cool. So the meeting today is actually for this debate generated in the Slack channel and out of the Slack channel, but most of you probably don't see it. So the thing is that in version 1, publish and subscribe were seen as from the same point of view of OpenAPI, for instance, like from the consumer point of view. It means that if you see publish in the spec, it means that you can publish, and as a consumer or as a user, or I don't like to use consumer because it's a overloaded term, right? Or as a client or whatever. And the same for subscribe. If you see subscribe, it's because you can subscribe. But since I saw a kind of problem in version 1 of people not really understanding the point of view of the verbs, I decided to change it from the other side. Like, okay, if you see publish, it means that this application is gonna publish, and you as a consumer can subscribe. So it's the opposite, right? That was fine until I think until we had some tooling and we could test it a little bit more, the release candidates and all of that, and then people started noticing like this is weird. I was expecting that, to be honest. It's weird for me too. The reason I did it was, as I mentioned, is because people were using it the other way around. And yeah, and basically, so I would like to come up. I mean, the goal of this meeting today is come up with a conclusion of if we should keep the point of view of release of version 2 or version 1, right? So version 2 is, as I said, it's from the application point of view. Version 1 is like an open API from the consumer point of view. I've been investigating a little bit myself in the pros and cons, but I don't want to distort the opinions here or the conversation. So I'm not going to stop myself. I don't want to say my opinion first. Otherwise, some people can get biased. So either with me or against me, it can be biased. So I'd like to hear from you. What do you think, right? So let me just an example, really simple example. Okay, let me share my screen. Yes, this one. Cool. You see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So, crap, this toolbars. Really simple one. We have an e-commerce system, and on the left side we have a HTTP endpoint, which is called post/orders. This is usually to create an order, right? On the right side, on the top, we have get/orders/IDs/status. So this is actually, I know this is HTTP, but since AsyncAPI also supports HTTP for streaming APIs, it was mandatory to consider this case too. And that was done on purpose, like use synchronous and asynchronous protocols just to see how they fit together. And this get endpoint, supposedly keeps the connection open, and you get status updates, as an HTTP streaming API. And then in parallel, you have an AMQP endpoint or channel, right? With orders, subscribe to order status messages. So the idea was to test this simple example. I know I've done it on purpose because I've done it on purpose that this example is oriented to sharing the API with third parties, like Travis said. Like, what about sharing this your API with third parties, right? Because so far we've been considering so much internal use cases, like how to use the spec to orchestrate microservices, for instance, or all this stuff, right? But not so much about sharing with third parties, and therefore there could be a lack of fit there, right? So I wanted to test this on purpose because the other side is already super tested. That's fine. Cool. So I tried this. I don't know if I change. I think I have to change my the screen that I'm sharing. Yeah. So that's. Let me just get rid of this. Super quick. That's an AsyncAPI 2 file. We have, as I said, we have a broker with AMQP that's supposed to be in the e-commerce system box. We don't care about the internal implementations. Supposedly, there's a broker there. And there are HTTP endpoints, okay? Channels are order status, and you have a subscribe. So this one, for instance, this one is seen from the client perspective, okay? As in OpenAPI, for instance. So you can subscribe to receive messages, right? Then you have message X, whatever. We don't care so much about the content of the message in this example. And then you have bindings for HTTP, and you have bindings for AMQP, right? In HTTP, I don't know if you notice, this is already like looking so much like OpenAPI maybe, this chunk here. This is just an example. So maybe it will make sense in the future to add support for OpenAPI chunks into the HTTP bindings. But that's a side conversation, another conversation. And then you have AMQP with exchange declaration, like there's an exchange which name is public, the type is a topic, the type, it's durable, the queue is durable, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then you have a binding key, which is orders asterisk status, okay? Same thing for the other endpoint, which is last order. This one, it only has the HTTP binding. And again, this is a post. This is looking a lot like OpenAPI, right? But in the same document, you have the two words. You have the HTTP, and you have the messaging ones, right? Through the bindings, because you can do you can customize how AsyncAPI behaves depending on the protocol. So that's one way of seeing it. I'm not gonna go into the components because that's not important now. And then we have the other example, which is this one. And this is seen like in AsyncAPI 2 so far. This is seen from the application point of view. So the e-commerce system will publish messages, so then the consumers can consume these messages, right? It's gonna publish messages as responses, as HTTP responses. that's how the e-commerce system publishes. So you see that there's not so much information here for HTTP like it was in the previous example. Here you don't really have much information. This could be debated, but probably this could be augmented to be similar to the other one or not. And then you have same thing. This is the same as the other one. It doesn't change. Just the messaging. This is fine, right? And same thing for last orders. The box, commerce system will subscribe. It will receive calls, HTTP calls, right? More specifically, post calls, which host body is going to be the message, right? But these are the two examples. So, as I said, I have an opinion. I'll wait for it to share it. Basically, because and also because I want to hear from you. What do you think? So yeah, is there anything that you want to share to continue the discussion before we go into the pros and cons?
So in So in like how I see it, when I see a async API schema in a service, the subscribe is what the services subscribe, which will be a publish method in some other services, and the publish block would be the messages it's publishing. So most of, I'm not sure if there is a way available, the subscribe thing will be referencing to a publish method in another async API documentation, which will be another service is publishing those messages, and then this service will subscribe them in the subscribe, and then there will be a publish which this service is publish. So that's what is my understanding of subscribe and publish in a service.
So I don't think I got it. So you mean like for instance, in OpenAPI, that's the perspective, like what the client can do with this service? Like if you see publish, it's because you can publish a message to this service. You can send a message to this service.
No. The publish means this service publishes these. You can. The publish means that you can subscribe for, if you're coming as a user, you can subscribe to those messages. Okay, you can consume those messages. Yeah,
that's what it currently is, right? Yeah. This discussion is whether that should be flipped around.
Yeah.
Basically, whether these async API documents should be, given out to third parties so that they can interact with your service, right? So instead of saying my app publishes on this channel and it subscribes to this channel, I'll say, if you want to interact with my service, publish this type of event on this channel, and then I'll do what I do with it. And so it's more from the open API point of view rather than from the service's internal point of view. And the conversation in Slack is, whose point of view are we looking at here? Like, who's going to see these documents? When I think of like people taking these documents and generating code and whatnot to use them, then it seems to make sense to be from the open API point of view, right? Because then the code will match the document. It'll be whatever .publish to post to some channel kind of thing. So I don't know exactly what's the best channel, but or what the best way to do it is, but from my point of view, I feel like it should be that same point of view as the open API.
But even for like, if we use it, you are right, as if it is these document would be for external users, but in my company we use them internally, but still our like perspective of developer is when we say like, okay, you need to listen to this event from that service, and then we go to the async API definition of that service and see what message is publishing and what's the payload, and then we know like, okay, we can consume this message in whatever service we want. So we use them internally, the whole async API, but still the perspective of the publish, when there's a published thing, means that it can be subscribed in other services.
I think no matter what way you see it, I mean, if you don't start from the beginning, understanding who is doing what, there would be always people confused because, for example, if you right now we're saying, okay, this is what this service is doing with external service, right? This service is publishing and is consuming this. When the version 1, it wasn't like this, right? So I was always confused if who was doing what, if the service was publishing, because the problem is when you say, okay, I have two services now, who is publishing what and who is consuming what? So I think that is the key part here, to know from what how to start thinking about who is doing what, Like if you are seeing this as a role of the service or as the external parties that are interacting with your service.
Yeah. To me, I think it's less important like if you're developing, say, a REST API, maybe you start with the open API thing, or maybe you just build your API, and what's going on behind that API doesn't really matter to the rest of the world, right? The world only cares. Like, they have this microservices internally, it's this order system that Fran just showed us. The people interacting with that order system don't really care what it's doing. You know what I mean? They only want to know how to interact with it, and that's kind of what the REST API or the open API would define. So you're creating a contract that hopefully you never break, so these other services can use it and interact with that service, and they have this contract together. You know what I mean? So these microservices talk to each other, and you can have both sides. Like, it can say, if you want to talk to me as a service, I'm the order processing service, then you need to publish orders onto this channel. And if you want to, after I process an order, I'm going to publish them on this other channel, so you need to subscribe to that channel if you're interested in what, the after effects of what I did with the order is.
Yeah. Do you mind if I jump in real quick? I actually had some time to put together a couple documents. I completely agree with you. I think async API is about the interface, not the implementation. If I might just share this real quick and walk you through it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time walking through everything, but what I was doing was I was realizing that the beauty of AOS, for the things that it doesn't do perfectly the way I'd want them to do, it really does an excellent job of capturing the interface of an HTTP API. And I get that async API has to deal with both sides, but I think we tend to confuse things a little bit as a result of this, and I think we might need to reset our reference point a little bit so that we can be both in line with OAS as well as making sure that we're addressing the architectural concerns. So from an OAS perspective, it delineates between the interface and the server instances, and I kind of take some issue with that, but it allows us to enumerate the list of servers that implement this interface, and so it mixes the interface, but predominantly focuses on the interface, and then happens to mention some servers as well as endpoints that we can use. So we see something, fairly similar over and over again. When we look at async API, there's, I think, an opportunity to address both of these use cases, but I think the core of async API should be the interface. And to me, the interface is really the channel. And right now, what it feels like is that we're trying to, at least the way it was before Fran renamed a few things, renamed the verbs, we had an interface which then talked about the subscribers or publishers, which then referenced, again, the interface. We went from interface to implementation to interface. And it confused me a lot. And as an author of it, I have to start thinking about the implementation. When the goal of a broker-based, message-oriented middleware or event-driven architecture style approach is to decouple those things, I shouldn't care who's publishing and who's subscribing. I should care, however, about the contract of the messages placed on those channels to make sure that both publishers and subscribers, no matter what the cardinality is on both sides, are adhering to the same contract, which is the message, and or maybe some of the protocol details as well. So what I wanted to do is say, is there a way that we can use AsyncAPI to separate the interface from the implementation? But for those of you in this call that do want to drive service implementations or stubbing or consumption from services from this, can we support that? And I think there's a way to do it. I think if we view AsyncAPI as a clear interface and we have the channels, and perhaps the way that Fran's example lays things out, where we defined how you publish and subscribe, so the semantics of how you interact with that channel in some way, maybe we need that in there somewhere, and I need to take a look at that. I like that example he posed. What we might be able to do is take that and then layer on this idea of publishers and subscribers at the top level that allow us to define actual implementation details if we want to code generate details. Now, I don't know exactly what this is going to look like, but my guess is it's going to be something a little like this, where we have, oh, sorry. Let me pull up some code here. Where we have this idea of publishers and subscribers that reference the channels they're for, and you could provide additional traits if you wanted to for those components that are actually subscribing and publishing to those. But my biggest concern really is the interface, and the interface lies in this channels block. So if I had a way within the channel to be able to specify the message independent of how I publish or subscribe that message, then that's the channel that I'm going to use to be able to publish or subscribe to. And if I have different contracts for the way I publish versus the way I subscribe, because my events are going to be lightweight events, not heavyweight events, then the way that I publish might have a different contract than the way I subscribe. Or as Fran pointed out, we might need to use different protocols. We might accept publications through HTTP or through Kafka or through some sort of protocol, but then the flip side, we only expose subscriptions on certain types of protocols. So all I would ask is that we make sure that we treat the channels as the interface with the message as the schema for that definition. We treat it as a first-class citizen. If we need to add in what Fran was demonstrating regarding the opportunities or the protocols that are available for publishing and subscribing, how I would actually do it, then let's figure out if that belongs underneath the channel or that belongs up at a subscription, a consumer publisher type of thing outside of it. I'm not sure where that belongs. But I think the core here that I want to make sure we come away with is, can we all agree that the channel is the interface, the contract, and we need to make sure we don't have any implementation details about what services are publishing or subscribing in the channels block, because that's up to you architecturally, and that's the whole point of a loosely coupled system that AsyncAPI would document. Does that make sense?
I completely agree with that, James. Just one note. I think we should go in that direction, maybe in the future. So the discussion today was more about the publish and the subscribe for semantics, right? Because that changes a lot of things, like that reorganizes the spec in a different way. And I think we should go that way. Over time, I realized that what you said, like the channel is the interface, and more people were coming to me like, hey, I don't really care who's publishing or subscribing. I just want to list a list of channels and the messages that are going to be flowing there, and that's it. I don't want to understand who's publishing or subscribing, right? But the problem is, so the way I didn't go that way is because of tooling, basically, right?
Yeah.
For tooling, you need to understand what a specific application is going to do. Right, how it's going to behave, right? Because in the end, what people are going to use is tooling, right? Not the spec itself.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I would make an argument that not everybody would, and I work with several enterprises that don't. They don't generate from, they use their specs as governance. They use their specs to enforce and to determine if runtime is actually working or not. But what I wouldn't do is drive a specification purely off of tooling. If you need tooling, then separate tooling. Separating the tooling semantics away from the interface makes sense. So if you want to describe more details about what that component needs to do, the interface could exist on its own, and then you could write the definition for tooling. But what I wouldn't want this to devolve into is what's the topology of your architecture, because OpenAPI doesn't even get into that.
Yeah,
it doesn't dig into that.
How this is different from OpenAPI because in OpenAPI you are required to mention the verb, right? Because you need to say, okay, this is what you can get from me, and this is what the service is posting or putting or whatever. How that is different from AsyncAPI when we are saying, okay, we are publishing and this is what is being subscribed to. I still don't get it.
I feel, sorry to interrupt, but I feel that this is a completely different topic, and I find it like really really interesting, and I think we should dig into that afterwards. But I think, and actually, as I said, James, I agree with you. Like, we should go in that direction, and probably the AsyncAPI version 3 should look more like what you had in screen, maybe. But so far, what we have so far, right? Because it's we are in the second release candidate, and we're gonna deliver soon. So we're not. If we keep making changes to the spec, then we will never release anything, right? So I will prefer to release this and then start working from day one to release the next major version, which will realign everything, right? And we can work on that. But today, and sorry to interrupt, but today, I mean, the thing is that my question that's hitting my head all the time is there any there will be any problem in doing in having the verbs with one semantic or the other? Like, I know that people, for instance, used things the other way around with version 1. And now people are confused because of the new meaning. But my concern is not so much about educating people. You can educate people you can tell them in big letters, like, hey, this is the meaning and that you should stick to this. My concern is more about, like, are we committing a mistake by changing it to one or the other? Like, can we find an example of where it will cause problems? Because if it's just a matter of point of view, you will always have people complaining and I don't like this point of view, and that's fine. My concern was not so much about flavors, right? It's more about if this can actually cause a bigger problem, having one perspective or the other. You know what I mean? And
Fran, I don't think we've heard your opinion yet. One more thing, and then I want to hear your opinion.
Yeah.
So one thing that would also benefit of having the flip point of view, the open API point of view, I'll call it. Well, one is that it's more in line with open API, which I think is easier for people to grok. But two, it also the duplication stuff where everything has a publish, everything has a subscribe. I think if you flip the point of views, I think you get rid of that duplication quite a bit, because for instance, if I say you can subscribe, or sorry, you can publish to this channel, and I'll deal with that stuff, like publish orders to this channel, and the order service will deal with it. But you don't have another service that needs to define the exact same channel with the opposite operation. It's just one channel one data model and one operation that order service defines, because that's how you interact. That's the contract with the order service. But you don't have another service with the exact same channel with flipped operations. So anyways, that's all I had to say. So it reduces the duplication. That's one big benefit I see.
But I think what I've seen about duplication of every single document having published and subscribed for the same channel, it's probably because you're defining more than one application in the same document. You know, and that's,
no, I mean, like even in your blog post about how to organize these documents, you always have, every app has their own async API file, and basically every app has the exact same channel with a flipped operation.
oh,
right?
Okay. I know what you mean. I thought
Right? That's the current way we're telling people to do it.
Yeah.
But if you flip the point of views, you don't. You just have one application defines the channel and the subscribe operation. There's never another side that says, I publish to this, because that point of view doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But if you flip the point of view, still you will need to document in the other side that it's subscribed, right? Because we are saying today, okay, this service publishes this message A, and your service subscribe to that. So we have the thing that we need to duplicate the message of create another file and reference it from there, right? But if you flip the point of view, how would you get rid of documenting in one side?
Well, let's use it. So there's two things there. One, like let's say the order processing, like in my toy store prototype thing, after the order is processed, like through payment processing, it goes to fulfillment. Once payment processing done, it gets sent to fulfillment, right? So fulfillment, there's two ways fulfillment will get the message. It'll be, hey, publish stuff to this fulfillment channel and I'll take care of it, right? Or the other side is, and then the orders or the payment processing service has to know which channel to publish to, but the order service doesn't have anything that says I publish to fulfillment's channel. Fulfillment defines that channel and that contract, right? Or the other thing is maybe order service doesn't care and they just publish to a channel. So they go, I'm going to publish the processed order to this channel, and whoever's interested in it can attach that channel and do their thing. And maybe fulfillment has on their side, they go, oh, I am interested in these orders that are done processing because I need to fulfill them. So it uses the contract made by payment processing. Does this make sense? Sorry if this is a bit confusing. But payment processing says I'm publishing processed orders on this channel, and fulfillment will subscribe to it, or whoever else. But fulfillment doesn't define that subscription. It just, as a service, it knows it needs to get orders, so it subscribes to the channel that payment processing defined.
That's my point. Like, then you only have AsyncAPI files with publish operation all the time. Like, you only define publishes.
Yeah.
The subscribe one is like from the browser collecting an order, for example, or a new order comes in and the payment processor says you need to send stuff onto this channel for me to order it. So that's the subscribe operation. Yep. And it may have a publish operation, or it may know who to talk to directly. So it knows it has to talk to fulfillment, so it sends it to fulfillment's subscribe operation.
But in this case, it will not make sense to have a subscribe operation, right? Like you read the publish operation from the sorry, not the publish, the subscribe operation from the server, let's say, right? Or from the service, and you just can, you know that because it says subscribe there, it will only sorry, it's the other way around. It's like you will never have AsyncAPI files with the publish operations. You will only have subscribe operations, right?
No, I just gave you an example of like maybe the payment processor doesn't care what happens next. Mm-hmm. It just says it's totally coupled from everything else because I'm going to publish processed orders on this channel, and whoever's interested or can subscribe to that channel, right?
I think we should flip it from user's point of view. The current implementation, I think, yeah, what it is, we should flip it like Franz, you suggested, because if you keep it like this, it's okay for the internal. But if you are supposed to give your async API to external users, they won't understand it, because because the current way it tells you what the service publish and what the service subscribe to. But the external user it has nothing to do with him. They want to know what you can publish to the system and what you can subscribe to. So even if we flip it, the internal within the organization teams or the developers, they can adjust, they will know, but it will be easy for the external user to understand what they can publish and what they can subscribe.
But is this external use that, I mean, now I'm wondering myself if this will be the most common use case. Because with OpenAPI, that would be the most common use case, right? That you create your API and you can expose it. But for a synchronous API, I mean, I'm not sure.
Well, you have
Slack has one,
right?
You have
right.
one, for instance.
I personally think it's most important for third parties because they're the ones that are going to read it and go, well, how do I interact with this service, right? Even if it's an internal service that the outside world can't access, if it's like, microservices within your organization, you need to know how to interact with each other, right? So I think that's the contract we're trying to define here.
And maybe just to chime in as well. I guess I agree that the channel is definitely the interface. I also agree right now from an AsyncAPI specification perspective, we are defining it from an application's point of view. And I think in a way that's good, like from a tooling perspective, and in a way it's bad if you look at it more from the systems perspective of what you could do, right? And so what we've been talking about from a Sol's perspective is that you can generate these specifications that basically show you what your app looks like, which is kind of like, again, sort of the server implementation side of a REST service. But at the same time, you could base, what we might want in the future as well as sort of almost like, and this is a bad name, but, either a catalog or a broker specification of all the things that you could do based off of what applications are actually doing, right? So you have sort of the abstract, which is sort of the what's available, and what actions are you available to do against the broker. And then you actually have a specification that maps the channels to what an app actually does, so that then you can have code generation that fits the developer experience. I guess that's the way we're sort of looking at the world, and just looking at that, AsyncAPI 2.0.0 RC1 at least does something for the app side, which is good. I don't think that means we're done at all. And I kind of liked James' sort of proposal there of, you have the interfaces separated from sort of the publisher and subscriber definition, which is kind of the action. But, obviously I think we want to think more on that as well.
Yeah.
You mind if I jump in?
Yeah, that comes to the point that James added before about separation of concerns, like the API and the implementation, right? If you want to know what the producer and the consumer does, then that's implementation. If you want to know the interface, then it's just the channels, right? So yeah, I think that's pretty obvious now. Sorry, Lucas, I interrupt you.
Yeah, just maybe add additional use case to the discussion. So yeah, for example, in Kima, where we integrate with AsyncAPI, we started using from the very beginning AsyncAPI 1.0, of course. And when I saw RC1 of 2.0, I was confused with these swapping of the words, not because I felt they're wrong. Actually, I was afraid that I'm using them wrongly from the very beginning, because actually the previous version was confusing. And why was it confusing? Because for us, the most important is really to describe what events are broadcasted from the application. So with the previous version, we had the spec was simply saying what messages you can subscribe to, but like physically, technically, you don't really subscribe to the application. You subscribe to, there's a broker you subscribe to, there are channels, and you simply need to only know what channels is the application sending messages to, and how the message looks like. I don't really, I don't really want to know from the spec point of view to which system at the moment in this particular instance of the cluster the message will go to, and where I have to subscribe. That's, for us, the most important is really this information of the what is the list of the channels, how the message looks like, and this new approach that we simply say, okay, we publish to this channel and this channel and this channel. That's much more clearer for the developer that is about to extend the application. So, for example, we like Kima is from SAP, so you can imagine the situation that you have e-commerce application, you have marketing application and customer service application, and the developer that needs to handle all. So, for example, he needs to react to the order, then maybe do something with the marketing application, and then also do something with the customer service. He only wants to know, okay, what are the channels coming from, to what channels the e-commerce is publishing to what channels marketing is publishing to, and these are AsyncAPI specs. And on the other side, you also want to see open API spec with the API definition. So for us, the interaction with the service, with the application is only through the REST API, but you can consume and extend it through the events using AsyncAPI. So this separation actually of the specs also, it's much, actually gives us much clearer approach here. So that's why I'm confused, and I can't really imagine how we could achieve less confusion if that would be just one single open API, for example. I hope you know what I tried to explain here.
Your use case, just to be clear with everyone, your use case is purely internal microservices, right? Because it's on Kubernetes. So you use the spec for, so as a discovery tool, actually, right?
Yeah. So we, you can imagine that there are monoliths like, e-commerce from SAP, marketing from SAP, etc. They all have different REST. So e-commerce is REST API if you want to communicate to it. Marketing is OData, so quite something like GraphQL, let's say. And the third one is, let's say, GraphQL. So they have three different interfaces you can talk to through REST. But then they are also connected into the Kubernetes server cluster. So they are sending just messages to a specific channels, and we, as you said, we use those specs as the discovery. So that's one of the use cases for the spec. But then we can we know in the Kubernetes cluster, once we connect those applications, we know what channels to create actually inside the cluster, and to what channels you can subscribe to as a user. But you, as a user, as a developer, but your perspective is rather you read the information about the application, what it's publishing, and not to what you can subscribe to, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it makes more. Yeah, when you are dealing with internal systems, I think it's much easier to understand it from the current point of view.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with externalizing the API, it's freaking confusing.
Yeah.
And confusing and can even be wrong. Like on the conversation the other day on Slack, I suggested a few times to different people to only create one AsyncAPI file. Like you only have one, like the internal one, for instance, and then from for the external one, they can just do the opposite. Like if the verb is published, it means that you have to subscribe, right? Well, no. Turns out that I didn't realize there's a problem there. Like you may publish to an endpoint. I can explain this with a diagram, with the previous diagram. I think it's going to be easier. So this is the same as before, just a little bit reorganized. So if you notice here, there is this could be seen as a publish, as it is right now, like the e-commerce system is publishing the event. And one could say like, hey, because this is published, you want to subscribe, right? That's fine. But this box here represents the channel, okay? Like, can be a queue, can be a channel attached to a queue, whatever, right? But this channel actually has two endpoints. It has this endpoint here. You can see my cursor, right?
Yeah.
So it has this endpoint, like the e-commerce system is publishing to this channel in this endpoint, in this network address, let's call it like this, and you can subscribe in this one.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, they're both related, right? But because you publish here, it doesn't mean that you will be able to subscribe here. You might be able to receive, or you might be able to subscribe here and also to subscribe in multiple other places, in another network addresses. When you're working with network addresses, you probably the thing is that we are mixing here the concept of channel and endpoint, and we're assuming that endpoints are always attached to the channel, right? And that's not always the case. So, why I'm saying this? So my opinion, now that I think it's a good time to say it. I think my opinion will be to keep it, let's say, I don't know how to say it, but I think that my opinion will be that to keep it as a public system, as something that you will externalize, because that's easily solvable. It's just a change of mind for internal system developers to say, hey, I know this is weird, but it can be done. But the other way around is not necessarily possible. Like
I agree.
You know, like and that, I mean, and I'm super happy with the current point of view. Like it makes it easy. Once you get used to this, you get it's super easy. Like it says publish, and if you have to generate code, or if you have to build tooling on top of the spec, that's super easy, super clear. But yeah, as James said, maybe we are polluting a little bit. He didn't say that, but polluting a little bit the spec because we want to adapt it in favor of the tooling. Which is, there's nothing wrong with this. It's just maybe it will be another spec. Who knows? But and also why I'm saying that this could be the best option to choose. And I'm saying I think it's better if we go in the direction that James pointed out. I think it's going to be easier to go to this place if we keep it as it was in AsyncAPI 1, for instance, right? I think it's going to be easier because then we are not mixing implementation, or we are mixing a little bit less implementation and interface, and it's going to be easier to split then in the future, right? So yeah, I mean that's the conclusion that I came out with from the discussions the other day, and also during the discussion today. It's not clear at all that one is going to be better than the other in terms of what you can do with it. As you can see, as you all can see here, there are some people saying like, hey, for us it's much easier to keep it like in AsyncAPI 2, and some other people saying like, no way, this is this is freaking consuming. So it's not a matter of taste. I think it's a matter of where we want to go. And I think that if we're going to go to this place, like separating implementation to from the interface, think it's going to be easier, and also to align with OpenAPI, to don't lose this alignment with OpenAPI. But honestly, I'm not like 100% sold of what I'm saying, to be honest. Like, this is freaking confusing.
Could you pull up that code example, the YAML example you had shown earlier when you first spoke? You had a couple async API.
Yeah, sure. Let me just which one? The first one?
The first one, I think.
The OpenAPI like one?
Yeah.
Okay. You see it now?
Yeah, I see it. So on the channels, where do we reference the message?
On the channels, yeah, here. It's here.
Is that the same level of bindings, or is that under bindings?
Yeah.
That's the same level of bindings, right? So that means the channel has a reference directly to the message, which allows us to, in this way, yeah, thank you. So in this way, oh, it's under subscribe. Okay.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's under subscribed. It's like,
so if the channel is the interface, does the message belong at the channels level? And then that would allow people to define channels with messages for their interfaces without the bindings, or they can include the bindings. In other words, they could progressively add more to it. It makes the specification a little bit more approachable, but just by shifting that one level to the left.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. What's the best decision right now to go to that place where we actually shift one level, like message is now on the channel level, and operation can be defined there or not. Maybe it's just optional, like you just want to define the interface, right? Well, I don't know. I think, yeah, that's.
I know API design is very subjective. The way that I tend to approach things is to try to group things together, and make sure that there's a parent that if it's optional, then everything underneath it goes away. And that was, I think, the thing that I struggled the most with version 2 was that for me to actually get into just the definition of what the message format looks like when I'm modeling it, I have to start thinking about publish and subscribe. And I'm not, the channel to me is the one that should have the definition of the message. If the binding requires a different message structure, then that's effectively a different channel, because you're going to have to do that. Right now, what we're saying is a channel could have any number of message formats based on how you interact with the subscriber publish.
Then it has another problem, James. If you put the message in the channel level, it has a problem. I'm saying because I was investigating this when I started the version 2. When you have protocols like HTTP, for instance, you have channels that can only that only admits one message for publishing, and the other message is not for publishing, for sending, and the other message is for receiving. Like, one for the request and another one for the response, because in HTTP the channel is the endpoint, right? And if you put the message at channel level, then you somehow at some point, for at least for HTTP, you will and for synchronous protocols, you will want to have a way to describe that this message is only for sending, like for request or for a response. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In messaging, like in brokers, for instance, this is fine. If you have a broker, you have a channel, that's totally fine. Usually the good practice is to only have one message definition for per channel, right? And that's totally fine. You don't care you do not care about publishing or subscribing. But the moment we enter the land of supporting HTTP for for HTTP forget the name, for streaming APIs, for HTTP streaming APIs, right? Like in HTTP2 with servers and events, then it slightly changes. I'm wondering now that maybe if the root cause of this problem is
HTTP, because
protocol, maybe we could have the HTTP binding to handle this in a different way. Just the binding for this protocol, right? But I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know.
Just one step further, we've been talking about this too, a similar thing to what you were talking about, James. But even a step further, where you could define the messages and all the formats, and then even after that, you decide which channels they go on, because one message might go on several different channels. You know what I mean?
Right. So you're using things like components, the definitions in the component, and then you reference them from here, like what we see here. So you have the messages down in the components area, and then the ref points to it, and that allows you to reason about the message structures before you even start thinking about the channels.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which kind of makes all this stuff kind of go opposite of the way it is right now. So it's probably too late to kind of get into that conversation, but
yeah, maybe for version 3. Yeah, that's what I was saying. That I mean, if we want to go in that direction, that's fine. So maybe the best thing that we can do at this point is what's gonna be the best decision now that will facilitate going in that direction, right?
Yeah.
So Fran, if I heard you correctly, you're in agreement that it should be from the external point of view, like the Open API point of view?
I think so, yeah. But like it's sticking with the Open API point of view and the AsyncAPI 1 point of view, because when I was using AsyncAPI 1, I was still able to define internal systems, right? It was probably a little bit weird, like Łukasz said, like it was strange, right? Because you wanted to have publish for when something is publishing, not because you can publish, but you could do it. And there was no problem at all. Like you just need to understand, you just need to learn this, right? But when it comes to external APIs, you have to offer, or you have to tell people like, hey, this is my internal file, and you as a consumer should have another AsyncAPI file, and they should both play together well. So you end up offering an AsyncAPI file for third parties, but you cannot control how the third party AsyncAPI file looks like, right? Because you don't know them, basically. So yeah, it's a little bit weird. In this case, we lose a little bit of control of, or we put too much responsibility on people to handle that things are cohesive and don't break. So yeah, it's and if we keep going this way, like in version 2, probably we're ditching a good use case for AsyncAPI, which is the use case where it is for public APIs, right? Like imagine like WebSockets APIs or HTTP2 with servers and events APIs, and I think that will not be good for AsyncAPI at all, and for the messaging world at all. Like, hey, we're just benefiting a lot internal from external, or we are completely ditching the external side because AsyncAPI is only for internal.
Why do we have to? Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't we have a mission to support both? I mean, right now, probably 90% of messaging utilization is internal. I think the world is starting to do more and more external. Certainly, many of our customers are doing that as well. But I mean, to me, we need to be able to support both methods to really solve the overall problem.
That's my point. If we keep the vision that we had in AsyncAPI 1 on our OpenAPI, we can do both. If we keep going this way, like in AsyncAPI 2, then we are not supporting well the external use case, you know, and we will be putting too much responsibility into the consumers to maintain their own AsyncAPI files when it doesn't really make sense, because you already have one file that you know, like in this case, the e-commerce system is offering you like, hey, this is how you can interact with me. Why should I maintain another one, right? You just use this one, right? I don't know. I feel like we're mixing too many things here. Maybe that's my perception, and that's why I want to keep it like the more conservative, let's say, as possible, instead of making a big change now in version 2 that we will regret a lot in the future, right? What do you think? What do you think, Lucas? Do you think that this will be a problem for you at Kima?
Like switching again back to the approach of
I'm not saying,
I mean, it's gonna be again confusing simply. So something that we already have, but so you could say no, it's not a big problem. But what I've learned over years is that making quick decisions that change something quite heavily right before release, there's a something back in my head saying like, what?
yeah. I'm not saying we're going to change it. I'm saying that that's you know, that's how lately things are resonating in my head. Maybe it's because lately I'm looking a lot at external use cases more than internal, and that's why, you know, it's. And then if we do the change and I start looking more at internal, then it will be like really strange to me. So yeah, maybe, I don't know. I mean, there's also another way. Like, I mean, we could do it in a different way. Like there's a field on the top on the root of the document saying this is how you should interpret the verbs. Right?
Yeah, like true or false.
Sounds really weird to me. You know, I mean, we could do it like this, like perspective field. You're right.
Well,
yeah.
You're already defining a perspective, because in the documentation that you've written so far, you're building an application and you're writing it from the perspective of the application.
Yeah.
If mentally, if I switch to thinking about the channel as the interface, then the channel's the thing doing the work. Then just like OpenAPI, the channel is the thing that's either publishing or accepting. Just like in HTTP, we accept. So in some ways, it's really about, a lot of it is about how we're going to frame this, and we either frame it by the specification, like you kind of said, you know, maybe half jokingly or whatever, but yeah, just being able to frame it up, or we have to make sure our story's straight. Because when I think about teaching this in a workshop, I'm trying to figure out, how am I framing this? And if I go into an enterprise and frame it as it's about your application, then they start to really kind of start thinking about dismissing it, because it doesn't consider the world that they live in, where many teams with many services producing and consuming, they see the world as, what is the contract that exists at the broker or exists at the, you know, the endpoints that are exposed, whatever that is. So I kind of, likewise with that caution, I don't want to make a major change at the last minute, but I also don't want to say this has to be the last minute. If the right thing to do for the community is to slow down a bit and take stock and examine multiple angles so that we can have a thoughtful decision, then that's what we might want to do. And if that means we have to extend the deadline from what we anticipated, then that maybe is the right thing to do. The right thing to do isn't always to either keep it the same to meet the deadline or to rush and still meet the deadline. Sometimes it's to move the deadline. So I guess what I'm looking for is, maybe the output of this is we all go off and start thinking about it. Maybe we narrow down a couple of decisions. Maybe we start taking what we already have that we've done internally and reorient it to some new structure that we just see what it looks like. We don't change the tooling. We don't change anything else. We see what it looks like. Mm-hmm. Just like when we design our APIs, we have to kind of come back and say, does this work? And maybe do some prototypes or some mocks to make sure that this is going to support what we want and that it's feasible for the majority of use cases.
Yeah, I agree. Like, that was beating my head all the time. Like maybe the way to do it is just postpone the deadline, right? Like, if there's such a major concern around the spec, not only in version 2, it was already in version 1. Maybe or maybe not. I mean, if it was already in version 1, I mean, that's fine. But the problem is that if we release version 2, I don't want to be releasing version 3 in 6 months, right?
Right. Yeah. And so your deadline and your release candidate gave us a constraint. The constraint forced us to start realizing some of the things that may or may not work. Maybe we come back and, I mean, it's just checking your math, right? It's there's no harm in looking and exploring new options. And if we come back to the same conclusion, great. If we identify something that would be so breaking that we'd either have, like you say, we have to release a version 3 or have some sort of fork or some sort of overlay or something that tries to fix the things that we missed, then that'd be certainly a bummer. But, we're not going to get it exactly right, but just being able to have enough examples and enough use cases that we can teach people how to use it and they can reason about it and they can address the particular concerns they have. Great.
Also, if we do this flip, we'll need to handle this in the converter of version 1 to version 2.
Sorry, say again.
We'll need to handle this in the converter from version 1 to version 2.
Oh yeah. I mean, if we change it, we will have to change the converter. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, but that's fine because I mean, release candidate was flipped. And one in release candidate 2, it was still flipped.
Okay.
3 switches back, flips it back. So, we treat every release candidate as a regular version. That we will not support it further. Of course, once there's a new release candidate, the previous ones are not supported. So yeah, I don't know. Well, I think the best thing that we can do here as a community is that if you could share all the thoughts and use cases that you have from either point of view about the publish and subscribe, about how we separate implementation from API, and and how are you using AsyncAPI yourself and your company, that will be really helpful because that. I mean, I was going to say that will help me take a better decision, but I will not like to be the only one taking the decision. But I also don't want you to take a decision for me, right? So yeah, that's why I'm doing this calls, right? So we can all discuss, and probably in the next call, maybe we can discuss what's the decision we take, and do it democratically and voting. And even though we're a small group and we don't probably represent the world, but yeah, well, that's what we have, right?
Yeah. It's
just myself, right? so yeah. So
I think it would be okay to take a decision in the next call, maybe next Tuesday. I will also look into our how we do define it, what are the use cases, and also talk to our documentation team if we are going to use it externally, how it would make sense, and then I can construct a final thing, and then I can share in the Slack, and we can discuss in the next call.
I think that will be awesome. Yeah, even just just telling me how you're using it, each of you, how do you plan to use it, or what's your most common use case, and I think that just doing that will help a lot, right?
Okay.
Just by doing that without without having to come to me and say, hey, this is what I will prefer. No, let's postpone this. Let's just tell me, or where would you like to see the spec going? That's fine. If you want to add it as well, that's fine. But sharing your use case, I think it's really important, because when I was previously to working full time on AsyncAPI, I had it's funny, but I had a better perspective of how to use AsyncAPI because I was using it daily, right, at my job. Right now, I don't have a use case myself, so I don't have a company where I need to use AsyncAPI, right? That's funny, but now I'm lacking this use case myself, and this, dealing with AsyncAPI daily in real world, right? So that will help a lot, definitely. Yeah. And I will try to act as an aggregator of opinions and and use cases and present
Maybe
it.
you can collect more use cases on the conference itself with one-to-one meetings. That would be much better than having calls or sharing in Slack, right?
Yeah.
But you'll have to extend the deadline in that case, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I don't mind extending the deadline further. I was just trying to understand, because that was heavily confusing for me. And as you can see during the call today, we can not all agree on the solution. So that's how fucking fucking confusing the topic is, right? So yeah.
Are most of us coming on the conference, which are in this call? I don't know. Although we have in the call, all these people are coming to the conference, API Days in
No, I'm not, for example.
No, I don't think anyone is coming to API Days Barcelona. No, but many of us will be on Vancouver on the API Special Conference. So yeah.
So can you, Fran, set some after the call, communicate some deadlines? When would you expect to get the description of the use case? What form? What would be the
I'll send a message on Slack and to put. It doesn't have to be something really, really elaborated, right? So just tell me your use case. I think I know your use case, for instance, but yeah, I don't know. What do you felt, for instance, moving from AsyncAPI 1 to AsyncAPI 2? What did you like? What you didn't like? And regarding this topic, right? Like the publish, subscribe, and all this stuff. Why it will be better for you in one way or another. It's just like a regular conversation in Slack. It doesn't have to be super elaborated. I just want to gather all points of view, right? So when I'm, for instance, testing a new syntax for the spec or meaning for the spec, I can take into consideration all the use cases, right? Like what will happen to Łukasz? What will happen to Jonathan? What will happen to James? It's more as a way to explore this. So yeah, is it what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can still describe, because I will have to anyway describe it in October at the conference.
Yeah,
so I can do the exercise before that.
Exactly. Cool, folks. I think we are long overdue already. We did like half an hour more. That's fine. So yeah, let's keep chatting on Slack, and let's try to make it a beautiful decision that we will not regret.